Okay, welcome everyone. This first section of this presentation is with respect to city staffing, and we're going to look at three things. Mercer Island's 2017 staffing relative to 5 other east side cities, and we'll focus on total staff and then a subset of that, administrative staff. Then we'll look at total city staffing, regular and contract employees, and we'll compare them in terms of 2 points in time, 2018 to 2012, and what are the changes that took place there. And then finally we'll look at what are the challenges of cutting staff by department. First up, the 2017 total staffing ratio comparison. So we're comparing ourselves to Redmond, Bellevue, Issaquah, Bothell, and Kirkland. And what we do here is, you'll see the total number of employees in the second column, and then we create a ratio. It's relative to population, per thousand population. And so in that third column over, you see the 2017 total staffing ratio. But we have to make some adjustments because not all these cities are the same. We're very, very similar, but there are things that are unique about each one. So for example, Redmond, they have no municipal court. There's the Northeast District Court that's out there. They also have no city attorney's office per se. They contract out civil attorney work. Bellevue has no municipal court. Issaquah has no fire department. Eastside Fire and Rescue, a fire district, provides services to them. They contract with them, and they also have no city attorney's office. And then Mercer Island, we have our Youth and Family Services Department. No other city has that other than Seattle. Very unusual. So when you make those adjustments, and the adjustments include for Eastside Fire and Rescue, since everyone else has a fire department, I added 48 FTEs. That represents the staffing necessary for the 3 fire stations in the city of Issaquah. And then for social services, since no one else really has that, they may have a few social services FTEs like in Parks and Recreation, we just deleted those. We deleted civil attorneys and municipal court employees as well. And then finally, for Redmond and Bellevue, they also provide in the fire department, besides basic life support services, advanced life support services. And those services, ALS, are funded by the King County, the 6-year King County EMS levy. So to be fair, we back out those FTEs. What you'll see is Mercer Island, among this group of 6 cities, has the second lowest total staffing ratio. Kirkland is a little bit lower at 6.75 FTEs or employees per 1,000 population. The reason for that is back in 2011, and this is during the Great Recession. The Great Recession impacted this region for 4 years, 2009, 10, 11, and 12. And in the middle of that recession, they annexed 3 major areas. That included Juanita, Finn Hill, and Kingsgate. And as a result, it significantly lowered their staffing ratio. And because it was during the Great Recession, they weren't able to staff up accordingly. I know this because I worked there for 10 years, and I know that city very well. Before 2011, Mercer Island had the lowest staffing ratio among this group of cities and other cities. Let's now focus on just the administrative staff. Now this encompasses the following departments and functions: your executive, your city manager's office, your city clerk's office. It includes city attorney's office, finance, human resources, information technology or IT, geographic information services or GIS, and communications, public communications. Now I didn't back out the civil attorneys from Redmond or Issaquah, but you'll see that Mercer Island has the lowest administrative staffing ratio amongst this group of cities at 0.97 FTEs or employees per 1,000 population. And you'll also notice that really Issaquah, Bothell, Kirkland, and Mercer Island are really tightly packed, and that's been that way for quite some time. Now let's shift our focus to city staffing, looking at regular employees and contract employees. Contract employees are term limited. Usually they're 2-year contracts. You'll see, and we're looking, again, comparing 2 points of time, 2018 to 2012. And we're looking at just the departments where, between those 2 points in time, there was a change in regular or contract employees. Now you add up all the changes, it equals 21.4 employees, a pretty significant increase from 2012 to 2018. Let's look at the next 2 slides, which will focus on what happened within each department. So, and let me orient you here. On that middle column, we're identifying positions that were cut during the Great Recession and then restored subsequently in 13 through 18. We're also identifying what are truly new positions that did not exist previously, and then there's a few cuts that are in there. And we're also identifying what are the primary funding sources for these various positions. You will notice what is conspicuously absent is property tax as the funding source. Predominantly, you'll notice that it's utility rates and permit fees and rec fees. So let's look at City Manager's Office. We added back in 2013 a 0.4 FTE sustainability coordinator. Now what we did, for those that are aware, is we had a 0.6 FTE for public communications. We married the two. That's a very unusual combination. We took a chance. We went fishing and we landed Ross Freeman to fill this position, these dual roles. This is funded by a combination of taxes and utility rates, roughly a 50-50 split. Development Services added 6.5 FTEs. Now that looks incredible, but when you stop and think about it, and of those 6.5, 3.5 are contract or term limited employees. As we came out of the Great Recession in 2012, 13 and 14, there was a ramp up, not only in Mercer Island, but in King County and the Puget Sound region at large. Significant ramp up beginning in 13 and 14, and then 15 and 16 and 17 were absolute peaks in terms of development activity and development revenues. Again, all these positions noted here are funded by permit fees primarily. I would note that regarding the 3.5 contract FTEs, when we finally reach a point where activity starts coming back down again, we will then relook at, do we really need that contract staff? Because we hired them because we were staffing up, and we will staff down as development activity falls. Fire. We had a fire marshal prior to the Great Recession, and we decided to experiment. And we eliminated the fire marshal position, a very unusual move, but it was because activity was during the recession very low. We thought, let's give it a shot. And the way we provided that service is through firefighter overtime and relying more so on development services. It failed. It did not work well. And so we restored the fire marshal position back in 2015, and it was funded not with new taxes, but by firefighter overtime savings and permit fees. IT, Information and Geographic Services, have added 2 positions, help desk tech in 13 and also 1 in 18. Both were funded by various position cuts. I will mention the most recent one this year was funded by ENTF Detective. That's East Side Narcotics Task Force Detective cut that happened when ENTF was disbanded back in 16. And then finally, the court. We had a full-time court administrator prior to the Great Recession. We cut that position to half-time during the Great Recession and restored a quarter of that position, so it's now a 3/4 time position beginning in 2018, and that was funded by court fines. Looking at Parks and Recreation, there were 3.25 FTEs added between 2012 and 2018. I will simply note the second one, the new position, the Community Center Nights and Weekends position. That was funded by rental fees, room rental fees in the community center. You'll notice there was a parks manager cut, half of an employee in 13. And then I'll focus your attention on the 2 park maintenance team members added in 2017. What we did is we took seasonal labor. We had at the time 4 9-month seasonal positions in park maintenance, and we converted them to 2 FTEs. There was that was a cost neutral move on our part. We did that because we were having trouble filling those positions, and the level of service was very uneven. And so we went to 2 FTEs, improved the level of service without a cost increase. Finally, let's look at the challenges of cutting staff by department. There's lots of barriers, fences we have to work within in the public sector, and this helps capture some of these things, as well as look at some of the revenue sources that we're talking about. So police and fire, 67 employees. Public safety is our #1 priority of government. That's the same for every other city that I know of. Both police and fire are subject to what is called contractual minimum staffing requirements. In other words, when we negotiate with police and fire, the unions, there is a minimum staffing requirement from a safety perspective that is established. In my experience, Mercer Island's minimum staffing requirements in police and fire are lower than other cities. The point is, when someone is sick or is otherwise out, we have to backfill with overtime typically to meet that minimum staffing requirement. And then just a reminder, we eliminated the East Side Narcotics Task Force Detective position in 2016. And in terms of DSG, or Development Services Group, again, mostly funded by development fees. Our current cost recovery targets for the building services portion of DSG is 95%. For engineering and planning services, it's 80%. And I should mention taxes, meaning property taxes, utility taxes, sales taxes, what are called general purpose revenues. They fund long-range planning work and code enforcement, and that's a legal requirement. Public Works, mostly funded, there's 35.5 employees, mostly funded by water, sewer, and stormwater utility rates. Taxes fund right-of-way maintenance and neighborhood traffic control. And then just a reminder, during the Great Recession, as we've mentioned to the Community Advisory Group before, 2.5 positions were cut from the right-of-way team. Since then, and beginning in 2017, we restored half of a right-of-way arborist position. Parks and Recreation, 30.5 employees. They have a total cost recovery policy in terms of revenue sources or funding sources of 50 to 55% in terms of recreation, ball field, and rental fees. So taxes are funding the balance. That primarily relates to park maintenance and partially funding youth recreation programs, which is a real typical practice amongst all their cities. Youth and Family Services, 21.3 employees, mostly funded by the $1.6 million in thrift shop sales. We set a record last year in that. And taxes fund $400,000 a year, or 63% of the mental health school counseling program. And then finally, all the other departments, mostly the administrative departments, the city manager's office, city attorney's office, finance, HR, IT, municipal court, that's almost 30 employees. And again, just reminders, I've just showed you earlier, in terms of the administrative staffing ratio per 1,000 residents, we have the lowest versus the other 5 full-service Eastside cities. Just a reminder of the CAG, the full leadership team will be at your February 5th meeting and will be available to answer any questions that you have.